Yes, good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the Football Tribe UG channel. Robert Kesakos is your usual suspect. Welcome back to yet another live broadcast on your favorite football update channel. It's a pleasure to be back with you on this beautiful um, Thursday morning, the 12th of March, 2026. I hope you've been doing okay. We do return today to yet again discuss the latest from the world of football following a second night of the UEFA Champions League round of 16 first legs from the Santiago Bernabeu, from Parc des Princes, and other venues where it did transpire last night. It was a rude awakening for Premier League teams yet again as some got humiliated with 3-0 thumpings and 5-2 defeats. Really, one that has sort of brought Premier League fans into a bit of a meltdown. But I'll say to you too that, yeah, well, the Premier League has been embarrassed. Put some context to it, and perhaps you could get the right picture of it before you make a fuss about it. Um, Surprisingly, I might, I'm going to make some. I made some interesting observations, and in two of those defeats, the managers were at fault for tactically getting it wrong, and that was to do with their team selections. And I mean, it's interesting, but I think it also comes when managers try to overthink the game. Because basically, that's what it felt to me, that one manager overthought the game and eventually they lost the plot. And that was Pep Guardiola. So we'll be talking about that and more. But as we wait to discuss all that, I wish to say thank you so much to all our new subscribers, those that have recently joined the community, those of you that have decided to be part of the Football Tribe UG channel. I see we are at about 3,972 subscribers. Please keep hitting that subscribe button, but do not just stop at subscribing. Also watch the content and, let us know what your thoughts are down in the comment section. We'll continue to engage you. For majority of you that do submit your comments, I, spare the time to return and, reply to some of your to those comments for as long as they are worthy. Assuming, what makes you think Manchester City is guaranteed to beat Arsenal at the Etihad Stadium and Arsenal can't beat Man City at the Etihad? Somebody there forgot that it was an assumption. That assumption as well can be true, but I think they may have ignored the context of the debate and they said, bro, what do you think? Okay, so yeah, we'll be looking at that. I will be talking about Arsenal's lack of creativity once again, because we did witness it last night. It was on showcase as they sort of failed to win away in Germany for this for yet another occasion, because I think they've made about 7 trips to Germany and have only won once there. So it's a pattern. It's a reality that they struggle whenever they travel to Germany. But we'll get to talk about that. We'll talk about perhaps the poor performances of some of their key players, like Bukayo Saka. I mean, Mikel Arteta ought to make some bold decisions, because first and foremost, have we started? Perhaps we have. He ought to make some bold decisions. So you'll allow me, we'll start with the Arsenal game, because they were the ones in the early kickoff. So we'll start with them. He ought to make some bold decisions. First of all, we've been in a kind of season where Bukayo Saka struggled for form. That's the honest bit. Of course, he's had his moments in and out of the team through injuries, but his injuries have not been too many. Nonetheless, his form has been a major issue across the entire campaign. Whereas I'm not of the school of the thought that he should be entirely dropped, because you want to back your best players to come up with, some really, really big moments when it matters the most, and he's really, really capable of that. But there's also such a thing as a reality of noticing certain patterns of play for you to think to yourself, yeah, it's not really working. I need to take a risk on here, because in all fairness, for his lack of effectiveness, especially when it comes to the final ball or the final third, Noni Madueke has looked sharper than Bukayo Saka. He's looked fitter. He's looked more threatening with the ball than his English national team counterpart. And in all fairness, or in the spirit of fair criticism, I'm sure even Bukayo Saka deep down knows that I'm not sure he knows what is happening in the context of why he is not performing, but he knows that he is not living to the expectations. So I think that's one of the things that when it comes to such players, you drop them to the bench and start with the on-form player, and you have them come on. That, in a way, it eases a bit of pressure on those players. Two, on Bukayo Saka himself, I feel he still looks at himself as the Bukayo Saka of about 2-3 years ago. The player whose entire team success almost revolved around him. And it's not a criticism to still have that mindset, but he ought to remember that he now has more quality around the team, and that there are more players that can help decide the Arsenal game. That it doesn't necessarily have to be about him or to be him to do it. Recently, I was talking about Chelsea, and I said Alejandro Garnacho needs to play for the team as opposed to playing for himself. Now, when I make those kinds of statements, the point I try to drive home is that sometimes these players want to prove a point that either they still got it, or that they are going to save the team or carry the team, and yet, whereas that can be true for them, it's not always the right direction to take. In other words, play the team sport. What does that mean? Pass the ball when you ought to pass it, as opposed to holding on to it to try and look for a shooting space. Oftentimes, you'll watch Bukayo Saka, and he's holding on to that ball, hoping that a gap is going to open for him, and he shoots the ball. And we saw the evidence of that against Brighton, for which he was successful with the shot. But I mean to say that he does not always feel the need to actually always do that. For as long as there are supporting players, there are players on the pitch, you ought to play the quick pass, and then because sometimes the difference between scoring and not scoring is that half a second, is that 1 second decision that you take, either to pass the ball to your teammate and dart yourself into space, or another gap, or slot yourself into another pocket, that then determines whether you score or not. Going back to yesterday's game, I've complained about this literally or almost the entire season. Arsenal themselves have had a change of strategy in how they approach games or how they play, with how they do not overcommit these fullbacks into the final third to create those congestions. But oftentimes, I see an Arsenal player receive a ball in the wing and they literally do not have support, or that support is taking too long. Yesterday, I saw Gabriel Martinelli take thousands of unnecessary touches on the ball when he should have been passing it quite quicker to help the team, think or move on. And I could see Gabriel Magalhaes screaming at him at one point to pass the ball, because he held on to the ball. He was not doing anything with it apart from stepping on it. He kept twisting and turning to nothing. He was not progressing the ball forward. He was not passing it to a teammate. Now, all those that have played football, even those that have played in a Sunday league, will know that passing the ball is what creates space for you. If you're looking for space and your talent is not as good as Lionel Messi, because there's nobody like him, then you ought to pass the ball to your teammate, and then because once you pass the ball, you take the attention off of you, and then you can dart into spaces. Basically, that's the logic, So, good morning, Pedri. How are you doing, my brother? I hope you're doing all right. Welcome back to the Football Tribe UG channel. My name is Robert Kesakos, and I come live to you from Kampala, Uganda, where it's 47 minutes past 9 a.m., the hour of 9 a.m. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure always to see you around. I hope you're doing okay. I was looking for you yesterday to give us your snapshot view of Barcelona's performance over in Newcastle and what you made of that game. Among other things, generally in the UEFA Champions League, where Premier League teams have struggled for one reason or the other. So, particularly for me, for this Arsenal side, for whom many have dubbed favorites, not outright favorites, but at least among the favorites of teams to win it. I remember I was having a conversation with Ismail Dakwachi, and he said Bayern Munich, Real Madrid, and Arsenal were the favorites, and I couldn't agree more. That even though, and I said this yesterday, that Real Madrid may not be having the best of seasons, but when it comes to the UEFA Champions League, they have that knack. It's like they flip a switch sometimes and turn it on. And I think we saw that yesterday. They had a very, very beautiful performance. Fede Valverde, arguably the man of the match, standout player. He did all the right things, but we'll get to that game in a bit. So I saw Arsenal struggle to create chances. Now, they struggled to create chances. They could not dart into the right areas. They could not shoot from distance. Bayer Leverkusen did not entirely play with the low block, but every time they conceded possession, they retreated into a low block. Because remember, they set up with the back three and these wing backs of Poku, as well as Alex Grimaldo. So they would retreat into a form of a back five, and then the four players in a way, and it meant that Arsenal did not have spaces to operate in. Always they looked to push Arsenal to the wings because they knew that they become less effective once you push them to the wings, because then you can crowd them out, and we could see Gabriel Martinelli oftentimes struggle to penetrate through. We could see Bukayo Saka sort of conceding possession almost at every time of asking when he tried to go 1v1 and things like that. So it was a tactical master plan on the side of Bayer Leverkusen for the coach, Kasper Jemand. I hope that's it's pronounced, Kasper Jemand. It was all right. I expected it to be hard. I think it will be easy at home. That was Pedri making assessment of Barcelona's away trip to Newcastle. So whereas it was a tactical masterclass from Kasper, Mikel Arteta on the other side seemed lost of ideas or devoid of ideas when it came to his own team. I do not know why he lacks the trust in some of these players. And the reason as to why I say that is you had Max Doman on the bench coming from a weekend where he was man of the match literally. And this is what I was saying the other day. He needs to be a little bit more bold or take a bit of a risk. So yesterday's game was that kind of game where it was worth taking a risk. Maybe not right from the onset, but in the later stages of the game. When you have a player like Max Doman, because look at Noni Madueke, eventually is the one that wins them the penalty, that helps them, rescue their reputation of staying unbeaten. That's why in this season of the UEFA Champions League. So I watched that and I'm thinking to myself, now is the time to maybe throw on a Max Doman. And he ended up insisting. He brought on Gabriel Jesus, which wasn't a bad thing, bringing him on for Ebeleche Eze, who had literally had no impact in the game. Victor Gyökeres, a lot of people will still blame him for not scoring the goals, but for me, I'll insist he cannot score goals if chances are not created for him. In any case, go back to the statistics or go back and watch the game and find how many chances did Arsenal create. At the end of the game, they had only 2 shots on target, one being a penalty, another a first half attempt from Piero Hincapié. That was it. Gabriel Martinelli rattled the inside of the crossbar, and that was it. So Arsenal could not find space to shoot from distance. And yet when you come up against a team that defends the manner in which Bayer Leverkusen were defending, the kind of team that retreats back into a low block, you ought to find tiny pieces of spaces and shoot from distance and try and have a go at it. So really, because let's be honest, they still have a good number of those kinds of teams to play in the Premier League. They still have a Crystal Palace. They're going to approach the game the same way. They have an Everton to play. They're going to approach the game the same way. It's only Bournemouth, perhaps a little bit like Fulham, where you could draw certain, pariahs that maybe they may not approach the game that way. So if you're chasing a Premier League title, and because this is a problem they've had all season and dating far back to last season, that when you come against a team that retreats into a low block and defend with all 10 players, you must look for that tiny bit of space where you can squeeze in the ball from distance. You remember when Arsenal were beating up against Sunderland by 3-0. You remember it took Martin Zubimendi shooting out from a distance outside the area to beat Robin Rofes to the near post. I did not see any of that yesterday. I didn't see that. Not from Eze, not from Saka, not from Martinelli. I mean, as effective as we want to praise Bayer Leverkusen for having been, it was due to Arsenal's lack of ingenuity that the game played out the way it played out. Hi, Gunnar. How are you doing, my brother? Good to see you back on the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. What did you make of Arsenal's performance from last night? So, you remember when I said yesterday, when I watched Atletico de Madrid beat Tottenham Hotspur, for me it was less about the quality of Atletico de Madrid than the poor quality of Tottenham Hotspur. In other words, everything that Atletico de Madrid literally did in that game were handed to on a silver platter by Tottenham Hotspur. So, using a similar example, everything Arsenal did not do, it's not because Bayer Leverkusen were too hard to break down. It's because Arsenal did not attempt anything outside the box to try and break them down. Because basically, they played the same game of football. And I, for one, have grown sick and tired of the safety kind of football. I understand wanting safety, but football is a gamble, as are many things in life. You ought to take risk. You ought to take a bet on yourself that I'm going to try and attempt to do this. So, in other words, when you do not attempt to shoot, for example, from distance, it's not like suddenly Bayer Leverkusen are going to say, okay, let's split our defense, 5 men this side, 5 this side, and then you have a shooting passage. It's not going to happen that way. The same way you do not give it to them the other side. Look at Robert Andrich's goal. That was a set piece. Right from the corner, Alex Grimaldo floats in a brilliant ball at the back end of the post. Arsenal sleep on the job. William Saliba could only watch on. David Raya jumped like some form of startled grasshopper, and the ball is into the back of the net. What do Bayer Leverkusen do on thereafter? They defend their goal jealously. So they themselves, Bayer Leverkusen, had only 3 attempts on target. And I remember in one of the moments that they broke through, even though they could not put a shot away, it's because Arsenal had orchestrated their own maze. I don't remember the exact player who had fumbled the ball to concede possession. So they've been that the entire season. One, they'll make errors that lead to their own cause. Not that yesterday was the case, but oftentimes one is going to get caught out of possession, or they're going to play a poor pass. Simply that, lapse in concentration. 2, when they come up against low blocks, they've had to rely on set pieces to sort of find the goals. Now, this takes me to the referee. Now, I understand I've always praised UEFA referees as being some of the best we get to see. That for all the controversy that comes with decisions from the Premier League and other domestic leagues, it's usually during European nights that we get to see the quality of referees stand out. Not that they make it about themselves, but they have the composure to see the game through the right lenses. It's not that they are perfect, but they oftentimes make the right decisions. Now, yesterday, and this started on the other day, particularly on Tuesday, but it's like they've been pre. It's like UEFA referee sat somewhere in the room and said, "We're not going to take any of this nonsense from English teams for the sort of shenanigans and chaos they create within the box, especially during set pieces." Now, I understand having taken that stance, but also dishing out yellow cards, like you're giving out, free credit cards, is not the way to go about it. I mean, first of all, let nobody lie to you that this pushing, shoving, and pulling, and physical battles and contests between players during set piece plays and corner kicks is a thing of today. That is as old as football itself, literally. You know how players hold onto each other, sort of hold. Somebody puts their arms on the other's shoulder as support structure to jump for the ball and things like that. We know a thing or two about that. That has been there for the longest of a time that I've watched football. Now, where the UEFA referee is coming is that of course, you want the goalkeeper to remain protected. Now, yesterday, particularly in that Arsenal game, I saw two players getting booked, and I think it was Kai Havertz and Grimaldo. Why? Because there was a bit of pushing and shoving before a corner kick is floated in. And I'm thinking to myself, if you're blowing the whistle because you've seen something, that's okay to say, guys, cut it out. I don't want this pulling and shoving. In any case, William Saliba will tell you every time he did that, the referee blew the whistle to say that's a foul. Because I think twice or thrice, William Saliba pulled Kofani, Christian Kofani. He pulled him. And the referee was right spot on to spot those things out. But when it came to the set piece play, it's a mutual pull and push kind of thing. Now, you simply call these players and say, guys, cut it out. I don't want to entertain that nonsense. If you're defending, if you're wanting to score, do it. Try to do it in the cleanest way possible. No pushing, no shoving, no pulling, no tagging, and things like that. I completely understand. But for him to summon them to issue out yellow cards, I thought that was an overstretch. That was an overstretch. It's like I've seen referees try to officiate those games or those moments as though I don't know, like they're on the mission to try and send a message to Premier League teams in a way, So I don't know. I did not welcome that. Why? Maybe I'm used to seeing it week in, week out, play out in the Premier League. Not that it's always correct, because it's a manipulation of the rules, really, to say, yeah, when you do that, that's not a foul. At least the rules do not, say so. But also, we've seen goals cancelled out for what has been deemed fouls in corner kicks. We've seen that. So it's not like Premier League teams get a clean slate or, a free rein when it comes to fouling people in the area. You remember, was it last season when Arsenal had the goal cancelled out versus Brighton for Ben White having sort of, I think, had a bit of a hold of the goalkeeper in a way, or impeding the goalkeeper and things like that. So I found that unbecoming. On the other side, I was impressed by Jorel Quensha. I thought he really, really did well. Robert Andrichi and Edmond Tapsoba, I thought they did well in that game. Excuse me. Palacios, Esquel Palacios, I thought Yeah, they look good. When you went back to 2002, this game also played out in a 1-1 draw. Ray Parra got himself sent off in that game in German. So Arsenal will have it all to do in the reverse fixture next week on Tuesday. Now, before that, they will have to play Everton. I do not think Everton are going to deploy a game strategy any much different from what we saw from this, a Bayer Leverkusen side, and that is what worries me a bit for this Arsenal side. That when you're faced with the low block, you must, first of all, after the core team is started, bring on players that can actually take on players and move bodies. And Noni Madueke is one of them. Max Doman is one of them. You will play to a disadvantage when you're playing with Max Doman because you know he's not going to try and fight for the ball back. He's still well growing into his counter-pressing and things of team maturity. But you need him. That's my feeling. So you're going to come up against an Everton side who are equally are going to deploy that kind of strategy. Sort of retreat into a low block every time you do not have possession, then look to catch Arsenal on the counter-attack, leverage on set pieces, trust that Jordan Pickford will help you make a save or two here and there whenever called to action. Basically, that's it, So they must conjure out something. I understand that the absence of the captain in Martin Odegaard does hurt them a bit, especially when it comes to their ball retention and recycling and a bit of ingenuity. But how many times have we asked for Martin Odegaard for that line-breaking pass and he's not delivered it? So let's not try to paint the picture that if he were available, then suddenly Arsenal would have had a very, very much changed game. I'm not persuaded to believe so. Would he make a difference? Yes. Is he capable of making a difference? Obviously, yes. But we've still seen Arsenal struggle, even with his presence, to create chances. Why? Because they've delayed somebody takes a second before playing a critical pass, or half a second to make the right pass or decision, and things like that. So they make the difference. Anyways, let's move on from the Arsenal shenanigans because it just did not work out. And Mikel Arteta, maybe before we leave it out, I've seen Arsenal players say, when it comes to analyzing the game, they've not seen a manager like Mikel Arteta, that he will tell you everything to expect in the game. Whereas that's a good thing, I also find it a bit of a limiting factor. That the player's mind is preset to having this concept of this is what is going to happen, so I must behave this way. And that sort of hurts their natural ingenuity because there are things that a manager coaches a player through. There are things that come naturally to a player. Once you're playing in that game, once you're in the moment, there are things that you come up with naturally by yourself. So, for example, there's no manager that teaches a player how to dribble. No, not one bit. But it is the player's brain that says, I think I can nutmeg this one, So we need to see a lot more of that. Anyways, let's move on. Manchester City. What a shambolic performance we watched from Manchester City. I do not think I've seen Man City look so brazenly poor, look out of ideas, look outplayed like I did yesterday at the Santiago Bernabeu. You do not get to see it very often, but yesterday was one of those days. First of all, right from the onset, I thought Pep Guardiola got his starting 11 wrong. How? How he managed to persuade himself into having three wingers on the same pitch is still a mystery to me. And how long it lasted is still a mystery to me. First of all, he set up with Gianluigi Donnarumma in goal, Nico Riley, who had a very, very poor game. Mark Guehi had a very poor game. Ruben Diaz, Kushanov, that was his back four. Then he goes with the Lodri in that single pivot of a midfield, and ahead of him was Bernardo Silva, Jeremy Doku, Savinho. Ahead is Brad Erling Haaland, who actually didn't play, and Antoine Semenyo. Now, we know Semenyo is a winger, Doku is a winger, Savinho is a winger. And I'm thinking to myself, couldn't use an extra body in midfield, either Tijani Reinders, a Ryan Cherki, a Phil Foden, because all those were on the bench. And you could see, So, first of all, the Man City wingers were not desperately returning back to help these O'Reillys defend the cushions. No, they did not. And it caused them problems. So I thought Pep Guardiola either overthought this or he horribly got it wrong. But that was the wrong starting 11 to have, particularly when it came to his midfield selection. Rodri, tick. Bernardo Silva, tick. Savinho, no. For me, that's where the game changed. Because you play with the 4-3-3, you then have your Jeremy Doku to one side, Semenyo to the other, Haaland centrally, but have an extra body in this midfield pocket. Now, it's easy to make the argument that all the goals they conceded did not come out of midfield. But if you know how a midfield ordinarily would operate, tell me why O'Reilly is isolated and there's nobody running back to help him. You know? Tell me why. Because you do not have that extra man in midfield. That if you have your Rodri committed forward, who is providing cover? You know? We know how Bernardo Silva ventures forward, oftentimes being all over the place, which is a good thing. It's not an insult to him, but you lack that protective shield in front of defense, because every time they went onto that defense, it looked like Real Madrid were going to score. And that explains the first half hat-trick from Fede Valverde. But the inclusion of Savinho had a poor game. In the entirety of the first half, I thought that it was only Jeremy Doku that was trying. You know, he kept bringing that ball to Real Madrid, of course to little success, but he nonetheless kept coming. All the others muted. Antoine Semenyo absent. It's like he had never played the game of UEFA Champions League football. He was like, you know how you bring somebody that is accustomed to bathing hot water and tell them after a rainy day you're going to bathe cold water? They're scared to shit. Looked like Semenyo was scared to shit. He was a no-show, at least in the first half. Now, Man City had a slightly better second half, collectively as a team, as a group. But still, they did not create much going forward. So, I thought Pep Guardiola got that one wrong. And that's why, by the way, at the resumption of the first half, he withdrew Savinho for Tijani Reinders. I was asking myself why he did not make the change much earlier on, as early as the first half. Then Ryan Cherki came on for Antoine Semenyo, Bernardo Silva paved the way for Ryan Aït-Nouri. And I'm thinking to myself, really? Ryan Aït-Nouri coming on for Bernardo Silva when you have a Phil Foden on the bench? I just could not understand it. It felt like Pep Guardiola was reserving his players for the next game. They have a trip away to West Ham in the Premier League come this weekend, but I do not think West Ham is a kind of opponent, if you're the size, caliber, and quality of Manchester City, for whom you get reserve players like Phil Foden on a shambolic night of performance at the Santiago Bernabeu. You know? Omar Mamouche, I think he eventually came on quite late in the game. Excuse me. He came on for Brad Erling Haaland. You know? So it was a really, really poor performance. So while it was a poor performance, it was an okay performance for Real Madrid, because first goal, 20th minute, Thibaut Courtois goes long, plays the ball in the channel, Fede Valverde runs onto it, beats Nico O'Reilly to it, dribbles past Gianluigi Donnarumma, bang, empty net, scores. Now, Gianluigi Donnarumma, you're still within your 18 yards box. I do not know why he doesn't stretch his arm to put his arm to that ball as Fede Valverde dribbles past him, because it's not like he played the ball so wide into space. I felt that Gianluigi Donnarumma, his arms could have attempted to catch that ball, or at least put it out of the direction for Fede Valverde. But it's like, you know how a goalkeeper comes out and then they suddenly realize, oh, I'm beyond my protective area, the box, so I must not do something stupid. That's how it felt like. and yet he was still within the box. Then, 7 minutes later, bang, Vinicius Jr. is past the ball, makes a run for it, plays a quick pass in the channel. I think the ball takes a slight deflection, either on Ruben Diaz before fighting Fede Valverde. One touch sets him up, second touch, bang, goal. Gianluigi Donnarumma beaten, 2-0. And then in the 42nd minute, Brahim Diaz flicks the ball to Fede Valverde. Mark Gay was caught sleeping because he comes out for the ball and sort of hesitates in a way, and then the ball is flicked over him. Bang, goal. But Ruben Diaz was there. Look, he looked frozen in the moment, Ruben Diaz. And it was 3-0. So a first half hat-trick from Fede Valverde made the difference as Real Madrid beat Manchester City by 3-0 because there was no goals in the second half. But Vinicius Jr. missed a penalty in the 58th minute. In the second half, Gianluigi Donnarumma had two brilliant saves, including that penalty from Vinicius Jr. You know, it was that sort of performance. Overall, in the second half, Manchester City defended better. They looked more comfortable. It's like they played without pressure. You say, what's wrong with English teams, not team one? What's wrong with English team, not team one? We'll get to that. That's essentially that's what we're discussing. I told you yesterday, Tottenham Hotspurs, Igor Tudor got it wrong with his starting 11 right from the onset. Man City, same story. Pep Guardiola got it wrong tactically, especially with his midfield. Arsenal struggled with what they've struggled with throughout the entire course of the campaign. That is against teams that retreating into a low block. They failed to break them down. Liverpool, there was no surprises there. If you've known Liverpool's record away to Turkey, and particularly against Galatasaray, in 6 games they had only won 1. And that was only a mere extension of that sort of poor record, you know. Then when it comes to Chelsea, PSG were simply the better side. There's no two ways about that. What's the other English team? Newcastle against Barcelona. Newcastle deserved to win. They had a tremendously good performance. The final result did not do them justice, you know. But yeah, so Pep Guardiola will know going into the reverse fixture that it's a whole mountain to climb, almost an impossible mountain to climb. But we've seen remontadas being done before. But Spanish teams, yeah, they go, particularly Atletico de Madrid and Real Madrid. Those are the kind of performances that they would have really needed to see after the first leg, and I'm glad they got them. So, although I was of the view that Man City get to knock out Real Madrid, and so that by the time they get to play Arsenal at the Etihad Stadium, they will have played Bayern Munich. Well, perhaps to hell with that. They did not play a single minute of football that shows that they deserve to even make it to the quarterfinals of the UEFA Champions League. Not one bit. I was very unimpressed by their performance, by the way. Very unimpressed by their performance. So, anyways, let's move on to Bodo Glimt. This one put 3 past Sporting CP. I must say, I wasn't too surprised with the result, but I did not think Sporting CP would let themselves get beat that hard. A penalty from Feti in the 32nd minute. Bloomberg, he's called Didrik Bloomberg. He scored in the first minute of stoppage time of the first half to make it 2-0, while Ho scored in this. He's called Kasper. I think, yes, he's called Kasper Ho. He scored in the 71st minute to make it 3-0. By the way, Bodo Glimt could have easily won it 4-0. But because on the other side, Sporting CP were firing blanks, you know. They just could not find the back of the net. They had only 2 shots on target compared to 5 from Bodo Glimt. Bodo Glimt was simply the better side, even though, you know, Sporting CP edged the possession just slightly by 51%, you know. corner kicks were 5-4. So you could see that statistically, you could think the game was well balanced. And it did look a bit balanced. Bodo Glimt were just more effective on the other side. One of those goals that they scored being a penalty, the first goal from Fete. So really, he's called Sondre Fete, the goal scorer, or Sondro Fit. Not Fete, Fit. Jesus Christ, some of these names. Then moving on, let's go to the Chelsea game because that was a humiliation. PSG completed the perfect revenge against Chelsea. Remember, we spoke about this, that if there's any game that PSG ought to be hyped about was meeting up against Chelsea, because Chelsea thrashed them by 3-0 in the finals of the FIFA Club World Cup over the summer in the USA last year. And yeah, it set the perfect stage. Bradley Barcola with a brilliant strike, with Joao Neves heading the ball quite cleanly towards him, and he fired it into the roof of the net. Bang, 1-0. Then Malo Gusto that was in the 10th minute. Then in the 28th minute, Malo Gusto, courtesy of an Enzo Fernandez assist, he scores to restore parity. You thought that Matevi Safanov should have done better, but perhaps the shot was powerful enough to beat him. And then 5 minutes to the end of the first half, bang, Ousmane Dembele on a quick counter-attack goes on and he scores. That ball took a slight deflection, I think, from Wesley Fofana before it hit the back of the net. But a brilliant counter-attack. He takes them on the counter-attack. Achraf Hakimi is coming through on the other side. He darts inwards as though he's going to pass it to Achraf Hakimi, and then darts back to his right, and he scores a brilliant goal. Then and it went into halftime 2-1. And I said, yeah, well deserved. PSG deserved to be in the lead at halftime. Then in the 57th minute, Pedro Neto. Now, Desli Doe slept on the job. I don't remember particularly who passed the ball, and whereas Desli Doe wasn't the intended target, but he simply watched on as Pedro Neto nicks that ball away and goes on a counter-attack, passes it to Enzo Fernandez in the 57th minute, and bang, it's a goal. It's 2-2, and I'm thinking to myself, wow, game on here. Arsino Bueno says, what's my club goalkeeper doing? Well, he's doing nothing short of what Antonin Kinski of Tottenham Hotspur had done the day earlier. But yeah, goalkeepers were made to look so bang average this week, whether it was Antonin Kinski, Guillermo Vicario, Gianluigi Donnarumma in that first half against Real Madrid. Felipe Jorgensen was made to look bang average. So yeah, trust me, it wasn't only about Felipe Jorgensen for these midweek fixtures. So then in the 74th minute, that is when Felipe Jorgensen decided to give to give PSG, just like Kinski had done. He passes the ball. It's a blind pass, intercepted by Bradley Barcola into the path of Kivica Kvaratskhelia, who plays it back to Vitinha, who loops it over Felipe Jorgensen. That is in the 74th minute. Bang, it's goal 3-2. And then Kivica Kvaratskhelia, what a second half performance did he have? He came on in the second half, provided an assist and scored a brace, because in the 86th minute, he scored a brilliant strike with Willian Pacho providing the assist to make it 4-2. I mean, you can blame the goalkeeper all you want for his shenanigans yesterday, but there's no way he was getting to that. It was such a straight strike from the 26-year-old Georgian international in Kivica Kvaratskhelia, who in the last couple of days has been linked with a potential move to Arsenal because of perhaps the relationship that does exist between him and the former Napoli scout or sporting director, not like sporting director, but one of the members of the recruitment team where Kivica Kvaratskhelia was. That was before making the move to PSG in January 2025. So we'll have to wait and see as Arsenal look to revamp their left wing. Then in the 94th minute of the game, Achraf Hakimi, PSG once again on the counter-attack, cuts it back for Kivica Kvaratskhelia, who sort of places the ball into the back of the net. Didn't even get the cleanest of touches of it because it hit somewhere in the middle of his leg, around the the shins and stuff like that. But it's a goal nonetheless, and PSG win the game by 5 goals to 2. I would say that the ultimate scoreline may have not been indicative of Chelsea's performance, but defensively, yeah, they were that poor. They were not solid enough. They gave away too many spaces. Whereas in the first half, they looked really, really good on pressing the ball. In the second half, they just gave it away. PSG had 8 shots on target compared to Chelsea's 4, 0 off target for PSG and only 3 off target for Chelsea. PSG edged possession to the tune of 58% compared to 42% of Chelsea. So really, to be honest, PSG was simply the better side. We have been waiting literally the entire season, and I did a video yesterday explaining why PSG are falling off in terms of form or by their own standards based on the kind of things that they set themselves up for last season, or the sort of high bar that they set for themselves up. And we explained why they have fallen off. But yesterday, if there are games this season where you watch PSG and they look like the kind of team that they were last season, it is this victory against Chelsea. It's a 5-0 victory against Olympique Marseille that culminated into the sacking of Roberto Di Zerbi, and those kinds of performances really. But when you watch them losing to Sporting Lisbon by 2 goals to 1, when you watch them losing to Stade Rennes by 3 goals to 1, when you watch them losing to Monaco last week on Friday by 3 goals to 1, you're thinking to yourself, is this the PSG that was blowing away everybody last season? You're bound to have those questions. But yeah, yesterday that was a beautiful performance. Kivicha Kvaratskhelia, Vitinha, Joao Neves, bang. What an immense contribution they have in that game, really. They really looked impressive. Really looked impressive. Bradley Bacola, good. I think he missed another opportunity to get himself a brace on the night. So, out of the 6 English Premier League teams that are still left in the UEFA Champions League, none of them won. The 2 that got better results, or fairly fair results, was Newcastle against Barcelona, 1-1 draw. Like I said, Newcastle deserved to win that game, but a late penalty cancelled out Harvey Barnes' goal. And then Arsenal scraping it away to a 1-1 draw against Bayer Leverkusen. But Tottenham Hotspurs, they look below average. Chelsea were poor. Man City got it wrong. Liverpool, very unconvincing. So, if all those teams return to the second leg, with the kind of performances that they had in the first leg, then it is only Newcastle that will make it to the quarterfinals out of all the English teams. Because Man City will get obliterated by Real Madrid at the Etihad Stadium should they return with the same sort of style of fashion. Arsenal would struggle again, or will struggle again against Bayer Leverkusen if they bring the same kind of play. Tottenham Hotspurs need I say more, because they were the worst team I've watched at a round of 16 fixture of the UEFA Champions League. That's how poor they were. Stage fright for Antonin Kinski. Mickey van der Ven sleeping. It was just too bad to watch. Now, it doesn't mean that the Premier League has lost its competitiveness or that they are not good enough. They are good enough for the virtue of the fact that they brought 6 teams to this stage. But after the first legs are played, I'd say, if you ask me, who has the highest chances or the higher chances of making it through, I'd still put Arsenal at the top of that list. I put Real Madrid. I put Liverpool. Yep, even though Liverpool lost. So I would say Arsenal, I'd say Liverpool. I'd say, under miraculous circumstances, Newcastle. Then in 4th place, I don't even want to think about it. Maybe Man City. Bottom of that queue, very, very poor performances from the Premier League teams, really. So bottom of that queue would be Tottenham, Chelsea, Man City. You know, when you have certain beliefs, or when you believe in the prowesses of certain teams, and they get obliterated the way Chelsea got, the way Man City got beat, you lose a part of that belief. So I've lost a part of that belief in their abilities. High Arsenal versus Bayern Munich, it was not Arsenal versus Bayern, it was not a penalty for Arsenal, just a favor for the Arsenal. Right. Now, Raymond, I want to disagree with you on that one. First of all, it was against Bayer Leverkusen. It's not called Bayern. It's Bayer Leverkusen. Then, two, it's a penalty. Is it clear and obvious penalty? Not necessarily. But I think, as you can see, was it Jorel Quensha or Edmond Tapsoba? I think it was Jorel Quensha making the sort of the tackle. It's his body, the fall through of his body after he's gone to the ground, that makes contact with Noni Madueke's foot before he hits the floor. Because, so, when you're reviewing that incident, you ought to look at it frame by frame. Even me, at the first time of reviewing it, I thought, oh, that's odd, that's not a penalty. Because as looking, it almost felt like there's a bit of a slight dive in Noni Madueke. That I was even thinking, if the referee gets to review this, he could, one, take away the penalty, but also end up issuing a yellow card to Noni Madueke. So, and then the more I looked at it, I saw the point of contact. It wasn't the defender's feet tackling Noni Madueke. It was the upper or middle part of his body that makes contact with Noni Madueke's foot before he goes down. And yeah, it was a penalty. But I understand where you're coming from. But you just need to further review that a clip and you see what I'm trying to allude to. So in the end, because it was checked by VAR, it was reviewed by VAR. A Man City fan said, call me crazy, but Omar Mamush is better than Erling Haaland. Indeed, he is crazy. Then somebody says, this is called Eric Injiru, suspect is a Kenyan, says two Premier League teams will progress. 4, led by Chelsea, in brackets, led by Chelsea, will go home. That two Premier teams will advance to the quarterfinals. That's his belief, and he thinks that all the other 4 will be knocked out. Okay. Somebody said first team Arsenal in the Premier League could not beat the 6th worst team performing in the Bundesliga. Now, when he says 6th worst team in the Bundesliga, he may cause you to believe that they are 12th on the Bundesliga standings. No, because the Bundesliga has 18 teams. They are 6th from the top. And you see, the idea about positions and how teams perform couldn't be more wrong in terms of be misleading. I think they would be misleading if you rely on them. I remember we used to do that kind of thing, especially whenever we went to betting houses. Whenever we went to betting houses, if you wanted to place a bet, you'd look at let's say the table and say, oh, this team is 3rd. There's no way this 8th team is going to beat it. And therefore you place your bet that the 3rd place team will win. With zero context, with zero history of acknowledgement, or what you think the other 8th team is capable of, zero record versus in terms of head-to-head and things like that. So we would sort of miss the plot and get it all wrong. And that I find that comment not different from that sort of impression. First of all, defensively, they've looked good. Bayer Leverkusen have looked good. We're talking about it, a Bayer Leverkusen side that came to the Etihad Stadium and beat Manchester City by 2-0. They went over to Greece and beat Olympiacos by 2-0 before a goalless draw in the reverse fixture during the playoffs. So, whereas they are not the most elite of teams, they can be effective. And when it comes to these knockout games, it's what you're one tactical masterclass away from being eliminated from the competition. It can be that simple. You're one individual mistake away from being eliminated. Look at how many individual errors culminated into goals in just those 8 UEFA Champions League games. Tottenham Hotspurs versus Atletico versus Tottenham Hotspurs, there were 4 individual errors that led to goals. 2 from Antonin Kiski, 1 from Mickey van der Ven for his slip, and then Jan Oblak on the other side. 4. Go to the Chelsea game. Go to the Chelsea game. 2 individual mistakes. 1 from Philippe Jorgensen, I think. I don't remember the other particularly from who, lead to a goal. Go to the Real Madrid game. Thibaut Courtois. First of all, I thought Thibaut Courtois made a mistake. Like I said, when I was explaining that first goal, go back and watch it. After Fede Valverde gets the better of Nico O'Reilly, when he comes face to face with with Gianluigi Donnarumma, and he's dribbling past him, it's not like his dribble was so silky that Gianluigi Donnarumma had to inevitably be beaten. You know? So it's not because as soon as he comes out and he's sort of getting done, every time I review that footage, I'm thinking to myself, spread your arms. At least that one arm was enough to get onto the ball. But he sort of, I think, he sort of thought to himself that maybe he's come out so far that is beyond the confines of his 18-yard box that he then hesitates to put his arm onto the ball, because then that would culminate into a red card. That's the only explanation I can make. Or otherwise, if it were African football, we would say, this goalkeeper pressed the bet on this game, because, when it comes to football in such small countries or where we know that sometimes players get bribed to lose games or do unsporting things, we are often quick to escape to that justification and ignore the individual brilliancy or moment of the sport itself, So, but I thought he should have gotten his hand to it. The more I watch it, the more I'm convinced that he should be putting his arm outrightly to try and, get get his arm to it. But he didn't. He sort of lets it go. And that's how Fede Valverde ends up scoring in an empty net. It's a very long pass from Thibaut Courtois. A beautiful pass, by the way, might I add. So overall in the game, he had, I think, about 3 brilliant saves. One came in the first half, I think, of Brahim Diaz. And then on the other side, like I said, Manchester City were bang average, firing blanks. But the one thing I liked the most in that Real Madrid game was how Fede Valverde would return so deep in defense to help to help Alexander Trent Arnold, because he knew, I think he had been well told that, look here, we love our Trent Arnold, but we know how inefficient he can be defensively. So he would go do his duties up front and then come back and occupy the wider right flank for the right back position. And then you had Trent Alexander-Arnold tuck inside a bit closer to the center backs. And then if they were not being so hard pressed, so hard, he would sort of pull outwards a bit as though he's coming into midfield, really. But when you go back and watch that frame, as soon as Nico O'Reilly gets done, first of all, Nico O'Reilly does not want to touch Fede Valverde because he knows if he brings him down, it's a red card. Now, when you watch Gianluigi Donnarumma, how he's sort of dribbled past in a way, you could see for me that his other hand, the left hand, could have gotten a touch on that ball, But eventually he decided not to, or he didn't. That's how he gets beat. That's how he gets beat. So I thought that for me would count for almost an individual error. Anyways, it is what it is. So those were the results from yesterday night. I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me, really, why he doesn't put his arm to it. But it finished 3-0 for Real Madrid. First half hat-trick from Fede Valverde was enough to undo Man City, whereas they've told themselves they believe they can still get through. They need to beat Real Madrid by 4-0 to advance, or win by 3-0 to take it to extra time and possibly penalties. Excuse me, which is not impossible, but really, really, really difficult to pull off. So anyways, guys, allow me to wrap it up here. I wish you a wonderful rest of the day. Before we wrap it up, do not forget, tonight there's round of 16 games in the UEFA Europa League and the UEFA Conference League. We'll not get into the UEFA Conference League, but here's what's to come for the UEFA Europa League. At 8:45 p.m., you have 4 games kicking off. Bologna against Roma, Lille against Aston Villa, Panathinaikos up against Real Betis, the FB Stuttgart take on FC Porto, while at 11 p.m. Celta Vigo at home against Lyon, French Varos host Braga, Genk at home against Freiburg, while Nottingham Forest will be at the City Ground to host Midtjylland. So those are the games that will be coming your way in as far as the round of 16 UEFA Europa League is concerned. Otherwise, I wish you a wonderful rest of the day. Stay blessed, and let's link up again later tonight. Bye-bye for now.